Let's talk variables. So what's a variable? A variable is a specific characteristic of something we're interested in that can be measured and can assume different values. Well, yeah, okay, but where do variables come from? When we think about variables, we have to start somewhere. And that would be a question about something we'll want to learn more about in a population. For example, are men taller than women? We refine that something into what we call a variable, which is roughly a well-defined concept of what we want to understand and measure. In this case, for example, a person's height, for which we devise a way to measure it. In this case, we would measure someone's height with a tape measure. That generates a data point. In this case, the data point would be height. Well, this is one type of variable we saw, the height of a person measured in some units, say inches. But it's not the only one. So let's take a little bit of time and think about how these data might look like. So, like in this case, we can have continuous values, which are basically numbers, numerical values, that represent durations or test scores or length. But we also have categorical or classification type values, which represent categories that are usually used to group things together, like gender or race. While this classification can be useful, it can also be limiting. That is, the more information we have about a variable, the better we can understand it. So let's consider a more nuanced way of looking at variables. So the least amount of information is given by simple, unordered categories. These kinds of variables we call nominal. The only information we have about them is the number of levels or groupings and what each of these levels means. Gender, for example, is one type of these variables. If the categories have a natural order, but do not represent equal intervals, or the difference between them is unknown, we have an ordinal variable. This is, for example, the case of letter grades. If to ordinal variables we add equal intervals between the values a variable can take, but we do not have a real 0 point, for example, temperature, for which 0 degrees does not mean the absence of temperature. Of course, this is for Fahrenheit or Celsius scales. We have an interval variable. When the scale has a true 0 value, which actually means the absence of the measured characteristic, we have a ratio variable. This is the case of measurements for length, where 0 means nothing, or the Kelvin scale for temperature, for which actually 0 means no heat present by design. This was just a brief overview of a very narrow concept. So please read the textbook and the supplementary materials linked in the course. They will provide you much more information than what's offered in this short video.